Great. And I will also change the view, which I failed to do last time. Okay. I want to, I'm hearing some background noise. So if you not mute for the moment, please mute. I don't know that that'll help, but it seems to maybe have helped. Okay. So last time we talked about this very strange ritual of a person, a corpse that's found between two cities, and a ritual which deals with how the guilt be expiated, and what can be done, and this ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken, and the elders of the city who come out and make a statement that our hands have not shed this blood, and so on. I got an email afterwards, I think, Barry, from you, about what happened to this ritual. And as was quite rightly pointed out, I went to great pains in our last session to talk about various ways in which this was not a sacrifice. And the text seems to be going out of its way to say this is not a sacrifice. So the question is, if it wasn't a sacrifice, so we know sacrifices came to an end with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which was the only authorized place at that time to offer sacrifices. But that would not explain how, in this case, or why, in this case, they came to an end. And there's a very interesting passage in the Talmud which actually tries to explain this. And it's a little bit chilling because it says, essentially, that murder had become so common, that this situation had become so common that it was impractical. That seems to be the statement. Now, I'm not sure that's true. I think that the reasons why this gets discontinued are unclear, but that's what the Talmud says. There's one other place where it says it about a similar mysterious ritual. And you might remember last time I said that this is a chok. It's a law for which we really can't easily provide any explanation. So there's another chok, and that has to do with a woman who is, this is in the book of Numbers, a woman is accused of adultery, and she has to go through an ordeal in order to prove her innocence. So that too disappears. And when the rabbis try to explain its disappearance, we get a very similar, unfortunately, a similar explanation, which was that adultery became so common that this really wasn't effective. I would mention about that a woman, according to rabbinic tradition, would be exonerated if her husband was an adulterer. So there was a general tendency, I think, to minimize this, and ultimately, it's simply not done anymore. And in both cases, it seems that there's such lawlessness that it's just no longer practical, according to the rabbis. More than that, we don't really know. Okay, so we're going to start some new material, and we are beginning now with Kitisa, which is, that's the Parsha. We're at verse 10 of chapter 21, verse 10. And it is, if you have the Eitz Chaim Chumash, page 1112. 1112. And we are here back in the laws of warfare. something that we had seen before. For example, the military exemption for those who had planted a field and not harvested, or gotten engaged and not been able to get married and consecrate that relationship, and even those who were just too fearful to serve. So that, and there were when you're engaged in a war, you're not allowed to cut down the fruit trees, right? We're thinking about the future. And so this is another one of them. And it deals with rape and soldiers raping captives, something which, as you know, was not uncommon in antiquity, and in fact up to our own times. I want to look for just a minute at a passage which I think in some graphic terms reminds us of the reality in biblical times. So I want to look back. If you turn to the book, well, it's the Haftorah for Bishalach. The Haftorah for Bishalach. If you have, it's chapter 5 of the book of Judges, but you'll find it right. Let me find where you'd find it in a Chumash. It's right after Bishalach, and specifically after chapter 17, verse 16. 17. And if you have the Eitz Chaim Chumash, what we're talking about is on page 430. So it's a section from the book of Judges, specifically from the story of Deborah. And one of these days we'll look at the book of Judges together. But first we're going to look at Joshua, and that we're not going to do till we finish Deuteronomy. Okay, so the story of Deborah. Deborah is this charismatic leader of the people of Israel, known as a judge. And she is the force. She's a little bit like Joan of Arc, that she rallies the forces and she sends them into battle against the Philistines. And we have two accounts. One is a prose account, and that's followed by poetry. And this is a poem that is in the name of Deborah, and Barak, who is her general. And in poetic form, it recounts the story, in particular the death of Sisera, who is the enemy general, and that is at the hands of Yael, who is actually not an Israelite. She's the wife of Heber, the Kenite. And I want to look at, beginning with page 431 in Eitz Chaim, verse 24 of chapter 5, the book of Judges. Most blessed of women is Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of women in tents. He asked for water, that is Sisera, who comes in, he's running from the battle. He asks for water. She offers him milk, right? In princely bowls, she brought him curds, right? And he drinks this milk, and it's a very maternal image, by the way, right? She's feeding him milk. The consequence, of course, is that he gets drowsy, and then her left hand reaches for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera and crushed his head, smashed and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank, lay outstretched. At her feet he sank, lay still. Where he sank, there he laid, destroyed. Right. So Sisera, the enemy general, has now been executed by this woman who tricked him. And now the scene in this poem shifts to Sisera's mother. Sisera's mother, who is back home, waiting for news of her victorious son, not knowing that he is dead. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she whined, "Why is his chariot so late in coming? Why so late the clatter of his wheels?" Right? Where is he? It's taking too long. She suspects something. The wisest of her ladies gives an answer. She too replies to herself. It must be that the battle is over. They must be dividing the spoil they have found. And here's the spoil: a damsel or two for each man. Spoil of dyed cloths for Sisera, soil of embroidered cloths, a couple of embroidered cloths around each neck as spoil. And then it says, so may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but may your friends be as the sun rising in might. So this image, Sisera's mother longing for her son, wondering why he is delayed. Not to worry. He's busy raping. Surely he'll come back, and he'll come back with booty. We'll have embroidery. We'll be getting good stuff. So don't worry. And I want to actually look for a moment at the Hebrew in verse 30, where it says they're dividing this spoil. Rachem rachmatayim l'rosh gever. So rachem, like the word rechem, right? Which is we often translate as womb. This is the female genitalia, right? I'm going to use a very crass term right now, which I would ordinarily never use. So forgive me the obscenity, but I think it really captures the Hebrew. A cunt or two for each man. Right? They are being described by their genitalia. And here, right, we have this sense. And the reason I wanted to bring this passage to you is this is how war is to be conducted. And in fact, rather than feeling ashamed that her son would be doing this, she glories in it. Don't worry, he's just raping. And more than that, their garments, the women who are being raped, are being plundered, and we'll get them. So not to worry. Right? That's the context I want you to bear in mind now as we turn back to this passage. And we're going to be looking at it, page 1112, chapter 21, and we're at verse 10. Okay, when you take to the field against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her and would take her to wife. Right? So here we have a very different image. Now, it's been a war. There are female captives, but there's no sense that you're entitled to rape them. Ordinarily, female captives are enslaved, and they come to work in households. There is no sense that you're permitted to sleep with them. I've mentioned before the Iliad, which, this is from the Greek times, early Greek times, and there you also have a view of women who are taken captive, who become war prizes, and the men get to divide them up, and there is a sense that these women also, it's fair game to sleep with them, to use them as you would. The Iliad is really the story of Achilles, the great warrior, whose war prize is taken away from him, and he sulks and allows the other Greeks, because he's the biggest warrior, and they fall in the hands of the Trojans until at the end he comes onto the battlefield, and they are victorious, in part also through Ulysses, who creates or has them create the Trojan horse, enables them to get beyond the barricades. But there too, right? In the ancient world, we have a sense that women are fair prey. So here's a man who doesn't, he really likes this woman and he wants her. So how does he get her? He gets her through marriage. That in other words, if you see a beautiful woman, you want her, she could either be a household slave, or if you want to have relations with her, you marry her. So that's the image here. So what do? You bring her into your house, right? She will trim her hair and pare her nails and discard her captive's garb. So she no longer will dress as a slave. And she has to cut her nails, and actually the gilach et rosha, not so much trim as shave her head. So she has to. Now, there are two ways of seeing this. One is that these things are about mourning, and she is mourning for her family, and she's entitled to do that, and you let her do that. The other one, which is rabbinic, is that she is to make herself as physically unappealing as possible. If you're going to take this woman and you're going to have relations with her, and you're doing it because you're all hot for her, well, so let's see really. And she does that, and then she's there for a month, and she's mourning. And a month is the standard mourning period in ancient times for anyone. We see it for Aaron and Moses, for example. So she's given this, and then you can possess her, and you can make her your wife. I want to just mention here the idea that she's a non-Jewish woman, and now she's going to become a part of a Jewish family. There is no sense here, right? She goes through various rituals, but this is not a ritual of conversion. In other words, in the biblical view, a non-Jewish woman who can marry a Jewish man, if this captive can become married, and when she becomes his wife, in biblical law, she's part of a Jewish family and she's considered to be an Israelite. Right? No conversion necessary. You see this clearly in the book of Ruth, where your God will be my God. And that seems to be what's necessary. Now, the rabbis who believe in conversion, they take Ruth's speech. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. I'll be with you. You know, what she says to her mother-in-law. And they read in various things about conversion. Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, says to her, no. Go back to your people. Oh, from this we learn that a convert is to be discouraged. Right? And then various things that are said to her again and again, the assumption is it's conversion. But here in biblical times, we don't seem to have a requirement for that, because she's going to become his wife. She's not going to be a slave in his household. And then after you're married, if you no longer want, or you desire really is the term, and you send her away, you have to do so outright. You can't sell her as a slave, because you have had, says your will with her, you should, and the verb here is lo titamer, which is a verb which exists nowhere else in the Bible. It's not entirely clear what it means, but the context seems to understand it as you can't enslave her. Okay, so much for the story about the beautiful woman who you wish to have as your wife, as a captive of war. I'm going to stop here for a moment, and I just want to open things up for questions about this or anything else I've talked about this morning. Hannah, go ahead.
What would be the status of any children raised from such?
That's a good question. So I don't know, but it says that she is your wife. Mm-hmm. And that suggests that any children they would have would be their children and would have the status of any other children. Now, we'll talk in a minute, actually, about situations of children, and if you have more than one child, and so on. That's really the next section we're going to come to. So we'll put that in abeyance. But I think the implications of the text quite clearly are that she'll be your wife in all respects, and therefore the children will be her and your children. I'm speaking from the point of view of the warrior who has taken her captive. Any other questions about this conversion, anything else that I've talked about? Great. So then we're going to go on to the next section and just change the view back. And here we have a case.
Rabbi, excuse me.
Yes, go ahead.
I am not able to find any of this in my Chumash. I don't know if different versions have it in different places.
You're not, what is it that you can't find, Hannah?
None of what you've been talking about. I have Deuteronomy 22. Is that
21? It's Deuteronomy 21, and we began with verse 10. Page 1112.
My pages are totally different, so this is maybe an older.
Okay, but so please
go 2001. It's too old.
Ki Tetzei.
Yes.
Ki Tetzei, the beginning.
Yeah. We're going to continue with verse 15. Give Hannah a moment to find it. And I want to look now at a situation. We're sort of continuing family law at this point. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other one not loved, and they have each borne him sons. So before we even get to what happens, just a word about this and about the possibility of having two wives, polygamy, right? And it seems clear that in the Bible, that's perfectly fine. And we know cases, lots of cases of men who have two wives, right? For example, Jacob, who's married to both Leah and then her sister Rachel. And that's a good example because here one wife is loved and the other one seems unloved, right? He's forced into marrying Leah. He's tricked, but it's really Rachel who is the beloved wife. So in the biblical period, we do have this idea, and it continues into the rabbinic period. Though it's clear it's very rare. And there is a certain desire to minimize it. And that, for example, there's a statement by Rabbi Yishmael in the Talmud, very famous, of the same generation as Rabbi Akiva, who says, this is what happens when you have two wives. One of them is going to be loved more than the other, and therefore there's going to be rivalry between them. And the implication is not a good thing. Not a good thing to have more than one wife. Now, what's the history of this? And there's a difference. We have Ashkenazic Jews who are of European extraction, and Sephardic Jews originally from Spain throughout the Mediterranean. Ashkenazic Jews end polygamy very dramatically around the year 1000. And it comes about because Rabbeinu Gershom, who's a French Talmudist, legal authority, around the year 1000, who issues an edict which says that men can't have more than one wife. And this seems to end it. It's interesting, I think, that part of what Rabbeinu Gershom is concerned about is women who are, a husband no longer wants to be with this wife, and he sees another woman that he desires. And so he is going to marry her and ignore the first wife. From Rabbeinu Gershom's point of view, that's not right. He has to divorce the first wife. So he outlaws polygamy, just completely outlaws it. And that's true for up to this day among Ashkenazic Jews from the year 1000. Sephardic Jews continue the polygamy, though this is never widespread. And you may recall stories of Sephardic Jews who came to Israel in the early Magic Carpet, for example, that operation bringing Sephardic Jews to Israel after 48, and when Jews are being kicked out of Arab lands, and some of them come with more than one wife. So today, nobody allows it. Polygamy is gone. But in the biblical period, seems quite clear. It's rare, probably, though we don't know for sure, but possible. So now this man has two wives, one who he loves and one who he doesn't. And when he wills his property to his sons, he may not treat the firstborn son of the loved one in disregard of the son of the unloved one who is older. He must accept the firstborn, the son of the unloved one, and allot him a double portion of all he possesses, since he is the first fruit of his vigor. The birthright is his due. So we have this idea of a person, somebody who is a Bechor, he's the firstborn. This is not the firstborn of his mother. This is the firstborn son to the man, right? That person is entitled to a double portion of the estate. Why? There is this sense that it's hard to actually, what does it mean? The first fruit of his vigor, Reshit, oh no. Somehow there is this sense that firstlings have a special status. And as you may recall, firstlings of crops belong to God. The first harvest, part of it belongs to God. The firstborn of animals has a special status. So this seems to be inherent. Firstborns have more responsibilities. Presumably, it's the firstborn who now has to manage the estate. There seem to be some religious obligations that firstborn have on behalf of the family. That becomes transferred ultimately to the tribe of Levi, but still, right? So there is this sense, and you could well say, this isn't right. The heirs should share equally, but that simply isn't the conception, not only in the biblical world, but in antiquity in general. Other cultures, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, also seem to have this sense that one is entitled to more. And in fact, the Bible struggles to a certain extent with this rivalry. And I would point out particularly the story of Jacob and Esau, right? Who struggle in their mother's womb, according to the Torah. And you remember, Esau seems to be the firstborn. He's the one who comes out first. But Jacob is holding his heel as if to pull him back in so that Jacob can be the firstborn. However, Esau is the firstborn. Esau is supposed to get the blessings of the firstborn, though he doesn't really see them as particularly valuable, and ultimately he gets tricked. Jacob, with his mother, at her instigation, tricks him, and he is, he gets his brother's blessing, and he gets this right prerogative of the firstborn. So this kind of struggle for who the firstborn is, and this is again the firstborn of his father rather than his mother. Now, there is in rabbinic times a sense that the firstborn of each mother has some prerogatives, and therefore the redemption is for the firstborn of the mother rather than the firstborn of the father, but even that is unclear. Okay, so at this point, he gets a double portion, and the father's preferences don't matter. And this also, by the way, I mean, in some ways, this avoids family conflict to a degree. One of the most common things that people do after death is there's this struggle over the will, and would parents leave more to one than another or cut a child out of the will? There's really a great deal of pain and harm. This takes it away from the discretion of the parent. It's very cut and dry. Firstborn, if there are 3 kids, right? Firstborn gets half, the other 2 get a quarter. That's it. Very cut and dry. Everybody knows this. It's not about favoritism. And in fact, this text particularly is there to prohibit that. Okay, so I'm just trying to see if there's no. Okay, so I'm going to open the view up again and invite your questions. Yeah, Hannah.
I believe symbolically, a parent still today is supposed to pay a shekel to redeem the firstborn. Isn't that still done?
A parent, right? So this exists in theory. Later on, however, the Bible itself is talking about redemption. This seems to be less about land and property, and it's more about the sense that the firstborn had some ritual or religious role, which gets transferred to the tribe of Levi, rather than inheritance. But we do have this pidyon haben, this redemption of the firstborn, in which those prerogatives are transferred to the tribe of Levi, but not the inheritance. So it's really a very different thing.
That happens at the breed, no?
It happens a month after the breed.
Hmm.
Well, not quite, 22 days, right? In other words, it's at the end of the first month of life that you do the ceremony, 30 days. But bris takes place on the 8th day,
Mhm.
22 days later. If that's when it's supposed to be done, it cannot be done before, just as a bris can't be done earlier, has to be on the 8th day. However, it can be done later. So, I had many times where found out that someone never did this ceremony.
Mm.
And so we would arrange it whenever it was. Kid could be 5 years old, right? But it's still, it's biblical law, and it's still something that's done. Anything else? Okay, we're going to go on to a law which is really quite striking, and I want to spend a fair amount of time on it. And we're going to look actually at a Talmudic text, because I want to show you how the rabbis deal with this. But let's sort of read through it first. So this is about Ben Sorer Umoreh. This is a stubborn, rebellious, wayward, defiant, however you want to, child, son specifically, it doesn't apply to a daughter, who does not heed his father and mother, does not obey them even after they discipline him. His father and mother shall take hold of him, bring him to the elders of the town in a public place in the community, and they will say to the elders, this son of ours is disloyal, defiant, he doesn't listen to us. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Thereupon the men of his town shall stone him to death. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. So this on the surface of it, I have to say, is shocking and appalling. One wonders how any parent could do this. The fact, though, that there is a judicial procedure is striking. I'm talking only now biblically, right? In biblical times, in general, in the ancient Near East, parents seem to have this power over their children. But here it's limited. And that limitation is, at least they have to have admonished him. We're going to look at that in a minute. They have to bring him to a judicial tribunal, not tribunal, because it's not 3 judges, right? Tribunal would be 3. And ultimately, if he's found guilty, he is executed. So let's look. I'm going to share my screen. And I was afraid of this. I need to, okay, let's stop sharing. Let me go here. So why do I have that? That's what I need to do. Okay, now let me share my screen. Okay, so here we are in Mishnah Sanhedrin, chapter 8. And so from where does a stubborn, rebellious son become liable to receive the death penalty imposed?
Excuse me, Rabbi. It's not, you're not sharing screen.
I'm not. Let me go back. Oh, I see. Am I now?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for telling me. Oh, so when does a stubborn, rebellious son become liable to receive the death penalty? So it's going to be very limited. From when he grows 2 hairs, signs of puberty, and from which time he's considered an adult, until his beard, and that's the genital area, has grown around. This is the lower beard, not the upper beard. but the sages spoke in euphemistic terms. As it is stated, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, which means it's a son and not a daughter, a son, but not a fully grown man. A minor under the age of 13 is exempt from the penalty because he's not yet received the age where he is liable to mitzvot. So he has to be, the implication here is this only applies to someone over 13, but not showing signs really of true adulthood. This is a very brief period of time. Right? And if you find it odd that they're examining the hairs, this seems to be what was done in rabbinic times, presumably, bar mitzvah, where the child becomes of age, isn't something automatic at the age of 13. Could be earlier, could be later. So here we have not girls and not most of the sons. It's a very small group, but the rabbis want to continue to limit it. From when is a stubborn and rebellious son liable? When he eats a tetemar of meat and drinks a half log of Italian wine. Rabbi Yossi says he has to eat a mana of meat and a log of wine, even larger amounts. These are both very large amounts. And now we're going to talk about how he eats them. If he eats them with a group assembled for the performance of a mitzvah, let's say he eats them in a seder, or if he eats them at a meal celebrating the announcement of the new month, or if he eats them when they had a second tithe status in Jerusalem, he's not a stubborn and rebellious son because it was tied to some aspect of a mitzvah. If he eats the meat of an unslaughtered carcass, animals that have wounds that would cause them to die within 12 months, repugnant creatures, creeping animals, untithed produce, or the first tithe from which the truma was not separated, the second tithe, the consecrated food, he's not a stubborn and rebellious son. Summarize, if he had ate anything that involves the performance of a mitzvah or a transgression, or if he ate the food, all the food in the world, but didn't eat meat, or if he drank any beverage but didn't drink wine, he's not a stubborn and rebellious son, unless he eats meat and drinks wine. Because it says, our son is stubborn and rebellious, he does not listen to our voice, he is a glutton and a drunkard. He is not called a glutton and a drunkard unless he eats meat and drinks wine. Although there isn't explicit proof, they quote a verse. If he stole that which belongs to his father and ate on his father's property, or he stole that which belonged to others and ate on the property of others, or if he stole that which belonged to others and ate on his father's property, he's not a stubborn or rebellious son. Rabbi Yossi says he doesn't become a stubborn and rebellious son until he steals that which belonged to his father and also belonged to his mother. If his father wishes to have him punished, but his mother does not, or if his father doesn't wish, and his mother wishes, he's not a stubborn and rebellious son. They have to both wish. Rabbi Yehuda says if his father and mother were not really suited for each other, it's an inappropriate match. He's not a stubborn and rebellious son. If one of the parents was without hands or lame or mute or blind or deaf, he's not a stubborn and rebellious son. And here we have the proof of it, which I'll skip. After he is brought to the elders of the city, he's admonished before 3 people, and they flog him. If he sins again, there's a court of 23 judges. He is not stoned unless the first 3 judges are also present. This son of ours, this is he who was flogged before you. If he ran away before he was sentenced, and afterwards, before he was caught, his lower beard grew. In other words, he now became a full adult. No, he can't get the death penalty. He can no longer be considered a stubborn and rebellious son if he ran away only after he was sentenced. And then His lower beard had already grown. He's liable. And then we get a very strange statement, which I'm not going to deal with today, but I will come back to. A stubborn and rebellious son is sentenced to death, not because of what he's done, but on account of his ultimate end. He will grow up to an immoral life. Better he should die when he's still innocent before causing excessive harm, and not die when he becomes guilty. Why? Because the death of the wicked is beneficial to them and is also beneficial to the world. The death of the righteous is detrimental to them and also the world. And we're going to stop there. Let me stop the share. Okay, so the point here, and I'll come back to this a little bit next time because we're out of time. The rabbis go to enormous lengths to try to essentially say that this simply isn't possible. They are, from the point of view of the rabbis, you cannot take a law in the Torah and say, nah, we're not going to do that. Rather, the rabbinic way of eliminating a law is simply to qualify it out of existence. And so we get a statement, ultimately, there never was and never will be a stubborn and rebellious child. So if that's the case, the rabbis say, it really isn't possible. Why do we even have it? So we should learn, right? We should see how grave this should be, even though we are not permitted. And the examples I gave you, by the way, from the Mishnah, the Talmud, right, analyzing the Mishnah, goes and gives all kinds of other cases, also where it's forbidden, and therefore conclude, no, couldn't be. There's one exception. There's a rabbi who said, yeah, but there was once a case, I saw it, I sat on his grave. It is this sort of anomalous case. He also says that it seems to be some kind of exaggeration. It does not become in any sense taken seriously as rabbinic law. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. I will come back to this a bit next time. Any questions, comments, anything at all, Sandy?
Well, I have two things to say. One is, so this law came from God, is that right?
Well, from the point of view of the rabbis, it does, but from the point of view of the rabbi, remember that they also think that all of these qualifications and limitations also come from God. In other words, from their perspective, God does not intend that this be followed. Right? And it's important to see that because they are the same ones who are saying it comes from God. You can't untangle from the point of Judaism. You can't untangle the two of them.
But why? I mean, why would God make such a law in the first place? Number one. And number two, there's nothing in there about repentance.
Yes. And so when the rabbis, when we go to,
I didn't see it. I missed it.
we go to, let me just read it. His mother, right? His mother, they discipline him. They come to the elders, right? There is, in general, in capital cases, the idea that he can repent. There is this sense that he has, if he repents, only if he repents and then goes and does it again, and then is warned a second time, right? That does this even apply? I think in general, in capital cases, other than murder, there seems to be in the Torah itself a clear sense that one can repent of these things. He is simply incorrigible from the point of view of the Torah. But it's a good question. And in general, the Torah doesn't talk about repentance in terms of each sin. It's kind of an overall view. Other things, Yeah, Hannah. By the way,
Okay.
you win the prize for the most questions and comments.
Don't you think it would have frightened the child to know this is
Yes.
hanging over your
Yes,
head?
I think it would have frightened the
And they
child.
don't get rid of it. It's just different.
That is
qualifications.
part of the point, right? That there will be dire consequences, even though they're not carried out, right? Yeah, I think this is to, to hold a very strong position, and you might say too strong, right? We shouldn't scare our children, but the idea here is scare them straight. That is the idea. Barry, were you going to say something?
Yes, yes. So the passage seems to emphasize the son is stubborn and rebellious, and every time it leads to son being a glutton and a drunkard,
Yes,
which
yes,
remind
yeah.
and the Mishnah seems to emphasize the gluttony and the drunkenness.
Yeah, this seems to be the only thing they're worried about, right?
And then, but, also thinking if it's a child, basically a young, a teenager, someone just past bar mitzvah age. I don't know how much of a drunkard, how many children are going to be drunkards.
Yes, yeah. I think, and I studied this with a colleague, not that long ago. And this idea of drunkard and glutton seems to be talking about some kind of addiction. That it's ingesting something that they almost can't help themselves, right? And it's interesting to look at rabbinic texts in light of that. I mean, it doesn't say that, but it's interesting that we're talking specifically about food and drink. A kid who, refuses to do lots of things, seems out of control. It's only talking about being a glutton and a drunkard, and it has to be both. It has to be enormous quantities. You might have seen in the Mishnah to a degree, but it's also, it seems that it has to be stolen. It has to be stolen under certain circumstances. Now that again is the rabbinic interpretation of these verses, but again and again and again, we're trying to limit it, and ultimately limit it out of existence. Saul.
I just want to mention this. This is an aside, but since we just celebrated Simchat Torah, several years ago, I was in a very large Orthodox synagogue on Simchat Torah, and the rabbi really warned the teenagers about not getting too drunk.
Yeah. So
I always think about that
I think
in this context.
Right. Your point is well taken. There is not so much Simchat Torah, but Purim. We really have this idea of drinking and even drinking to excess. And there's all kinds of rabbinic concerns about that and expressed. It's very unfortunate, I think, that there are synagogues, and I will specifically talk about Chabad for a minute, because they really ply kids with liquor. And on college campuses, this is part of the way they attract them. They want to attract them. And this is not an isolated instance. It really does seem to be something that's rampant. And from my view, problematic. Now, they will say, right, it's a mitzvah. They're doing a mitzvah. Remember what the text says. If the drinking, first of all, they have to be gluttons too. But if the drinking is while doing a mitzvah, or if it's, getting drunk on non-Italian wine or not kosher wine or whatever it is, right? So if you want to get kids drunk, right, you can say, well, as long as it says, it's a mitzvah like Purim, we're okay. Yeah, I think your point is very well taken. Anything else? All right, so see you next week. We'll pick this up then. I want to mention the fact that following week, it's not clear that we're going to have class. And the reason is I have jury duty. I have to call the night before to see if I'm actually required to come. So once I find out on Monday night in 2 weeks, then I will immediately send out an email, which will either cancel the class or in fact be a reminder that we are meeting. But just so you have that kind of in mind. You know, as we get through this tough time in Israel, and really our prayers are with them. Again, I would encourage you to give generously to organizations, mainstream organizations, because there are some scams out there that are supporting the Israeli people in this crisis. So on that note, I will end things up and look forward to seeing you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.